close my computer and work from the paper notes here and see if this does a little better for our sound. John has informed me that I'm giving some interference to the people online, so let's see how this works. So we left off, and thank you to Brother Steve, by the way. I didn't mention that at the start. You got to give people their flowers while they're here. For being ready and able to fill in for me yesterday. And I wish I could have been there again to hear it. I heard you did a wonderful job. I will go back and watch it online. Don't feel bad. So the next portion of what we're looking at here is the action of mental dialogue. And so as you look at this verb for the word dialogizomai, you can really see the action come through. Now, this word is used to express, and the verb or verbal form for mental conception is used in a couple of different ways. Go with me over to, no, not go with me over to, look to your slides. And so as a verbal conversation taking place in the mind of the individual in an imaginary in imagery, not imaginary, of the possible outcome of the thought and consideration, but not necessarily socialized. And so this is the first way that it can happen. And so remember back to our senses giving us thoughts, and then this imaginations or mental conceptions taking place. And what's playing out here, I'll go to the next, oops. Is this. And so you see a thought, you see the mind, will, and emotions affecting that thought, then you see this inner conception. And so the processing of the thought, the visualizing of a thought, the formulation of a conception. Now it can go one of two different ways. It can stop right here. And we kind of alluded to that before. Or it can go further where we've seen, and you can verbalize those conceptions. Now, what did we look to and see where this happened? As the disciples were talking, they had these mental conceptions in themselves, and then they socialized them with each other. And so who's going to be the greatest? I'm going to be the greatest. Or this person over here is going to be the greatest. You see that take place. And so hopefully that kind of helps you to picture this. Excuse me. Hopefully that won't happen too many times in this second hour. As a verbalized conversation also that is shared with others is the other part of that. And so the inner mental discourse that takes place, we want to look at as well. And so as we're looking at it in this form, we're looking at that which takes or results from the action taking place within the mind of an individual prior to expression. And so that's kind of the first one we looked at. And so go with me over to Mark chapter 2 and verse 6, as well as verse 8. We see that the scribes conceived imaginary, boy, I keep doing that, imagery concerning Jesus, saying he could forgive sins in the place of the heart. Go with me over to Mark chapter 2 and verse 6. And a lot of these are going to sound similar. And as we hit them, I'm going to skip a few here because we only have a little bit of time to get to the last part, which is going to take up a lot of our time. But pick this one up in verse 1. And again, he entered into Capernaum after some days, and it was noised that he was in the house. And straightway many were gathered together, insomuch that there was no room to receive them. No, not so much as about the door. And he preached the word unto them, and they come unto him, bringing one sick of the palsy, which was born of 4. And when they could not come nigh unto him for the press, they uncovered the roof, and when they had broken it up, they let down the bed where the sick of the palsy lay. And when Jesus saw their faith, he said unto the sick of the palsy, Son, thy sins be forgiven. And so remember, we looked at this one in another context before. And the Lord heals him of this palsy. But in verse 6, he says, But there were certain of the scribes sitting there and reasoning, And so having this mental dialogue in their hearts, why does this man thus speak blasphemies? Who can forgive sins but God? And immediately when Jesus perceived in his spirit. And so again, look at this one, and the difference here from our last one. There, he didn't even, it was intimated in the context that he had heard. It wasn't expressly stated that he didn't hear what they said. Here it's saying he perceived in his spirit. He didn't have to hear what they said. They didn't have to socialize it to him. He heard it, or he understood it, in his spirit. And that they so reasoned or had these mental conceptions within themselves, he said unto them, why reason ye these things in your heart? And so what's easier? Is it easier for me to say your sins be forgiven of you, or get up and walk? Either way, I've healed the man and I have the power to forgive sin. And that's what he wanted them to understand from it. We also see that men around John the Baptist, and I'm going to start skipping through some of these because they're going to overlap. John the Baptist had an inner conception regarding if he was the Christ, or the men around John the Baptist did. And we can also look at this as that which takes place specifically within the minds of an individual. And so we see that Mary, and we won't go to that one again because we saw something similar to it in the same context. But Mary had the mental discussion regarding the news the angel shared with her concerning the birth of Christ. We also see that the rich man in the parable conceived thoughts within himself concerning what to do with his riches. And then lastly, the high priest challenged the council for failing to conceive in their minds that it was expedient for Christ to die on behalf of the nation. Now, this action of inner conception, we want to look at a little bit further. And we see this action of constructing thought in the mental concept in the mind. And so, again, that would play into, what, did that get entered twice there? That's the same verses. Skip down to point D, the outward expression. And so this is where you're actually socializing this. And so it would be that last part where you see verbalization of inner conception. And so the expression pertains to mental concepts being socialized to other individuals. And so you see the disciples socialize their conception amongst each other concerning what the Lord meant by predicting his death. We can go to that one over in Mark chapter 9 and verse 33. And remember, as you're thinking about these disciples, the Lord often tells them he's going to die and he's going to be resurrected from the dead. But it's almost as if when it happens, they had no idea that he had ever said this, right? And we saw that in one of the contexts we looked at early on, that they actually in that context, it said it was hidden from them. But pick it up in verse 30. It says, and they departed thence and passed through Galilee, and he would not that any man should know it. For he taught his disciples and said unto them, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of men.